Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to those of you that are joining us for the first time, and welcome back to all the colleagues that have been exploring the theme of upheaval with us over the course of the conference. Go ahead and put yourselves on mute. Today is our final day of the program, and I'm excited to tell you it's a particularly robust one. We're very proud of it. Today, you'll hear from 23 different voices around the world on compelling topics at hand, including perspectives from some of our colleagues in Germany, the subject of accountability in Jewish museum narratives, the way we can make space for new talents and new voices in the field, how we talk about Israel, as well as concluding observations from our conference chairs and conference advisors. Before we get started, I'd like to thank again the sponsors who have made this whole conference possible: the Leon Levy Foundation, the Albert and Lillian Small Foundation, Toby Philanthropies, the Krupp Family Foundation, Rabbi Robert and Virginia Bear Hurt and the Joanne Marks Kovar Scholarship and Fellowship Fund, the Anna R. Cohn Fellowship Fund, and JMuse. Thank you also to these funders that support CAJM's work throughout the year, including Canvas, the Gottesman Fund, the National MIRJAM League Foundation, and the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation. And now it's time to get started with our first session on Perspectives from Germany, New Core Exhibitions. This session focuses on new core exhibitions at the Jewish Museum Berlin and Jewish Museum Frankfurt, exploring how they develop new approaches to interpreting Jewish history while contending with their context and past. What does this imply for our own Jewish museums and for our ongoing struggles with difficult histories? Today, I'm so glad we're going to hear from MICHAL Friedlander, Curator of Judaica and Applied Arts at the Jewish Museum Berlin, and MIRJAM Wenzel, Director at Jewish Museum Frankfurt, who will be in conversation with Susan NEIMAN, Director of the Einstein Forum and the author of Learning from the Germans, Race and the Memory of Evil. And with that being said, I'm now going to turn the floor to Susan. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. It's funny, I'm often in panel discussions where someone apologizes for not being a philosopher, which is my background. So I'm going to turn the tables and apologize for not being a museum director. I've never curated an exhibit. What qualifies me perhaps for moderating this discussion is that I'm an American Jew who spent most of her adult life in Berlin, and I have thought and written about what it means to be a Jew in Berlin, how the Germans deal with their Nazi past for more than 30 years. It's no secret to those of you who run Jewish museums elsewhere that the German situation presents very, very special problems. I hate the word issue, as if you solve a problem by calling it an issue. It does present problems. For a fairly long time now, a consensus has been building in Germany that it's fundamental to German identity to acknowledge the horrors of the Holocaust. That's an acknowledgement that came late. It was slow. There was a lot of resistance to it, but sometime in the past, it depends on exactly where you date it, the past couple of decades, that claim has become very fundamental to Jewish identity. To German identity. One of the problems with that sense of self-identity is that for very many Germans, it goes along with knowing very little about Jews, except for the claim that we killed them and it was horrible. And so a Jewish museum has an incredible amount of tasks. And while I haven't had a chance to see the Frankfurt Museum, Michal did give me a quick tour last week of the very impressive new core exhibit, which I was glad to see. I was not a fan of the old one, but I did get to see a virtual tour, which Miriam sent me, of the Frankfurt Museum. And in both of the exhibits, it's very clear that a Jewish museum in Germany wants to walk a fine line between acknowledging the catastrophe, but also showing that Jews are not merely victims, showing something about the rich Jewish tradition, particularly in Germany, but sometimes outside of Germany. And that's a really difficult tightrope to walk here. One of the things that I hope both of you will talk about a bit, the question of who are the stakeholders in a Jewish museum. I was quite astonished to learn from MICHAL last week that either 93 or 97% of your visitors, at least according to one survey, were not Jews at all, although the Jewish Museum in Berlin is the second most visited tourist object in Berlin, the first one being the Reichstag. So obviously there's a lot of very, one is appealing to the Goyim on the one hand, trying to educate the Goyim. And on the other hand, one needs to pay attention to the Jewish community. It should be said here that half of the Jews, according to some estimates, it's very hard to get good statistics, but half of the Jews living in Germany today do not belong to the official Jewish community, which is a state act. You join, you get taxed, and you commit yourself to being represented by what is normally quite a conservative body. But it's clear that a Jewish museum has to be responsible in some sense to that community. It's also clear that the museums need to be responsible to the German state, because these are important. If, as Angela Merkel has said, and other people have said, preserving Jewish life is fundamental to German identity, then it's a state issue. There's an elephant in the room, which I'm glad Melissa brought up so that I didn't have to. How do we talk about Israel? That's a difficult question everywhere, but it's a particularly difficult and complicated question in Germany. But I think it would be most helpful for you both to begin by talking a bit about the histories of the museums that you're representing, and then the history of these magnificent new core exhibits, and what were the decisions that went into changing the core. So I think Michal is going to go first. You're muted.
Am I unmuted?
No, yeah, you're fine. You're fine, Michal.
I'm not showing the screen though.
Ah, there you are.
There we go. First of all, I'd like to thank Melissa for the invitation, and also thank all the other people involved for creating this wonderful international forum for discussion. And for me in particular, it's great to see so many of my old friends from my former life in the States. In this particular international group, I imagine that a lot of you are not familiar with the background of today's Jewish Museum Berlin. So as Susan suggested, I'm going to give you some contextual information to begin with. A Jewish museum existed in Berlin before World War II, originating in the collection of the Berlin Jewish community. But it was forced to close in 1938 and its contents destroyed or scattered. The post-war idea to form a Jewish museum in West Berlin emerged in the 1970s, long before the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The original plan was to make the museum as an expanded department of the pre-existing municipal museum housed in this Baroque building and funded by the state of Berlin. After lengthy disputes, the Jewish Museum received autonomy and independence from the Berlin City Museum, which relocated elsewhere. The creation of such a museum was a political initiative desired by the German federal government. And that's exactly what Susan was just saying. In 2001, the Jewish Museum Berlin was established as a foundation under direct federal supervision, with a national rather than a local mandate. At that time, it was understood as a cultural historical institution rather than a community museum in the form that is familiar from community museums in the United States. The JMB today is comprised of the Baroque building, the zigzag addition designed by Daniel Liebeskind, garden spaces, and the Academy building across the road. This was originally a hall for a covered flower market. And at the same time as creating a core exhibition these past years, the second half of this building was developed to create a children's interactive educational space called Our Noah. The design team is from Olson Kundich in Seattle, and the space is inspired by the pioneering vision of Noah's Ark at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. So it may look a little familiar, the style, to some of you. But due to the pandemic, this incredible children's world has yet to open, unfortunately. In spite of the core exhibition's great success, the first core exhibition, it was felt that it was the moment to renew the design and revisit the content. Unfortunately, you don't have time today for a virtual tour of the new core exhibition, so I can just give you a small sense of this huge project, covering 3,500 square meters, which is around 3,800 square feet. The museum has always been a destination for German school classes. And in the year before we closed, we hosted over 3,000 school groups. In order to serve a public educational need, the core exhibition has a chronological narrative, documenting the history of Jews in Germany. The 5 historical chapters span from the beginning of Jewish life in Ashkenaz through the Emancipation period, the Enlightenment, and onwards up to the present day. The largest amount of space is dedicated to the periods of National Socialism and to post-1945. These historical chapters are interspersed with thematic spaces, which break the chronological narrative. The concept evolved from the idea of integrating broad themes such as sound, image, object, and word. Our first thematic space opens the exhibition, and it is Torah. We decided that we needed to provide a deeper understanding of the elemental religious elements, Torah and Halakha, which are of central interest to our predominantly non-Jewish audience. And here I have the actual figures that Susan mentioned before. At the same time, we repeatedly stressed the diversity of contemporary Jewish self-understanding, from Orthodox to atheist to cultural Jew. And I'm having technical difficulties. And we try to undermine visual stereotypes of Jews by showing and giving voice to Jews who do not necessarily correspond to a white, male, straight-bearded Ashkenazic norm. The centrality of the Torah for Jewish thought and culture is underscored and echoed in the last room of the exhibition, the theme room, The Jewish Object. In this installation, we've broken away from displaying ritual objects around life cycle and holiday themes. I've been working in Jewish museums for around 30 years, and it was a relief to finally have the chance to do that. And the showcase is organized according to the ideas of Kedusha and the relative sanctity of ceremonial objects. Another theme room is music, which is a good example of the spectacular new design and scenography that works harmoniously and respectfully with the Liebeskind architecture. Here and in other thematic spaces, we reference and include international Jewish communities beyond Germany's borders and present Judaism as a vibrant living culture. As you can see, the majority of our visitors are not from Germany, and we have tried to include material that could be of particular interest to these audiences. The first core exhibition was much criticized for relying on loans, but our collections have grown immensely since 2001, and 70% of the objects on display are from our own collections. In addition, there is an interactive digital wall where visitors can discover the richness of our family collections in more depth. Another exhibition feature is that the historical narrative is brought into dialogue with the present through contemporary works of art, including Ansel Kiefer, Yael Bartana, Edward Duval, and a major video installation for our introductory space, commissioned from Gilad Ratman. The museum does not collect anti-Semitic, however. Our approach is that such collections belong in a non-Jewish German history museum. But of course, we cannot ignore centuries of anti-Semitism in Germany in an historical exhibition. In the first core exhibition, it was felt that anti-Semitism was a theme that could easily overshadow everything else in a historical epoch, and so it was hidden in drawers to be discovered and revealed by the visitor. This is not a position that we can take today, and both positive and negative interactions with majority society are addressed throughout the exhibition. There's also a theme room dedicated to the subject of anti-Semitism, conceived primarily for school groups. In this space, groups are offered a moderated discussion on socially relevant hot topics, such as criticism of Israel and the so-called circumcision debate. We also approach the Holocaust differently, consciously moving away from a teleological sense of inevitability. We mark the years 1933 to 1945, 1 year at a time, with banners suspended from the ceiling. They list the 962 legal decrees made against Jews by year, making the extent of the Nazi regime's bureaucratically decreed persecution spatially palpable. Parallel to this, we present Jewish perspectives of the same time, using photographs from Jewish sources. We show how possibilities for agency became increasingly restrictive, until immigration was no longer an option, and Jews were deported to their final destinations and to their deaths. As mentioned before, the post-1945 period is given far more space than in 2001. We present DP camps, the processes of restitution and reparations, and the Russian-speaking immigration from 1990 onwards. The complex triangular relationship of Germany, Israel, and Jews is considered primarily through historical footage in the space that you see here, which is dedicated to it. The contemporary era and the exhibition as a whole concludes with an epilogue, a joyful chorus of voices. In this video installation, Jews living in Germany today of all ages and backgrounds speak out. Our preliminary feedback shows that this installation is extremely popular with visitors, even though at this point, let's face it, they are completely wiped out. We are looking forward to opening our doors again, whenever that may be. But to end on a positive note, the federal government recently decided that they will provide funds to enable free admission to the core exhibition for everyone. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just ask you one question before Miriam begins? Was that something that's good news that the federal government is going to support free admission? Was that a complicated process? Was that initiated by the museum?
It wasn't initiated by the museum. It was very interesting. It was after we had had our official opening and a lot of government officials came to see the exhibition. And it was decided after the opening, we didn't even apply for it. We decided that everybody who wants to should be able to see the core and also to go to the Children's Museum. That will also be free for everybody.
Wonderful.
Which makes a huge difference for the local demographic of Turkish people who live in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Miriam.
Okay, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our new Jewish Museum in Frankfurt. We happened to be able to open it last year on the 20th of October, but we had to close 11 days later. And so okay, you see me? Did you see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So just that you understand, for those who don't know the museum, it's the first communal or municipal Jewish museum that opened in the Federal Republic of Germany in 1988. I'll talk about that a little later. And the stakeholder question, I'm acting on behalf of the city government, so to say, and I'm entitled to, whenever I sign an email, I should, sign on behalf of the city government. And for my personal background, I maybe should say that I was working 8 years at the Jewish Museum Berlin and was in charge of a department that is now called digital publishing. So I think we have a lot in common still. So this is shortly who we are. We are one museum, we have two venues. And I'm saying we have three platforms, two venues. One is the Museum Judengasse, the other one is the Jewish Museum, which is now being renewed, always being in the Rothschild Palais. I'm going to talk about these two venues, but the third platform, which is even more important nowadays, and which was built up since the time that I'm there, is our digital platform. And that's the most right now, and even before it was the platform where we reach out to the biggest audience. We reach out to about 30,000 visitors per week on that platform. So the Rothschild Palais was a classicistic building at the side of the main river, constructed in 1823 for a not that known Jewish banker family called Speyer. And in 1843, the Karl Meyer von Rothschild moved in and lived there with his family. Later on, it became the first public library for fine art and sciences. There you see an image of that. And in 45, it became a collecting point. Frankfurt was US headquarters, and the US Army decided to install in the library, which still existed at that point, which was not named the Rothschild Library anymore, but a city library, and the US Army decided to make this a point of restitution. Our second venue, another contested site. It's at the site of the first Jewish ghetto in Europe. This ghetto was installed against the wish of the medieval Jewish community in 1642. And when the city administration decided to build a new building, they were digging into the ground and they found the remnants of 19 houses. A spectacular find in 1987. And there were fierce protests to keep those finds, but the city decided to keep on digging and building the construction work. And on the right-hand side, you see one of the protesters. He's now the cantor of the egalitarian minion. And so the site was quartered and the protesters were being taken away, and a compromise was achieved. And this compromise is now our Museum Judengasse. I give you a short introduction by a movie.
In 1460, the Frankfurt Town Council decided to resettle the Jewish population to a segregated area. The first Jewish ghetto in Europe, as it was later referred to, was established. At first, only a few families lived in the narrow lane along the old town wall, but their number gradually increased over the years. In the 17th century, roughly 3,000 people lived here. Frankfurt's Judengasse became an epicenter of Jewish life in Europe. 300 years later, the foundation walls of this lane were discovered when constructing an office building. After a public outcry, a museum was set up showing some of the finds. In 2016, this museum was given a new look. The entrance is now directly next to the old Jewish cemetery in Batonstrasse. In the exhibition, you can see valuable objects alongside the archaeological finds and experience how Jews once lived in Frankfurt. We look forward to your visit.
So in 2015, we got the unique chance to renew both of our locations. And I'm first going to give you an insight into the Museum Judengasse location. Outside of the entrance, there is a memorial site, and that's the Börneplatz site, which is commemorating the 11,908 Jews that were deported and murdered from Frankfurt, each one by name. And so this site, the memorial site, is based on intensive research the Jewish Museum did for years. But what is important for me to say, and that's a first difference to the Jewish Museum Berlin, is the memorial site is outside of the museum. It's at the entrance, but there is no memorial site inside both locations. And at the other side of that wall, there is the second oldest Jewish cemetery north of the Alps. The oldest gravestone dates back from 1272. And it's still in place, as you see. It's partially destroyed, but not all of it. That's the first room of our museum, Judengasse. In this first room, we are documenting the historic site and its destruction. And we refer to how Judengasse would be, what would be the place of the early modern Judengasse in today's city's landscape. So these are the exhibition views. You look into the remnants of 5 houses, or the fundament of 5 houses. And we were installing a choreography of light that highlights certain places in the fundaments that were of special importance, like, for instance, the ritual bath or the well or the gutter. And we start, and that's what you see on the left-hand side. We start with a gallery devoted to Jewish ceremonial objects. And later on, in the ruins that are used, or we put certain objects on display, different kind of objects, scriptures. You see in the middle, the painting of the first Frankfurt Jew, Jüsken Stern, archaeological finds, and we put an emphasis there on daily life in early modern times. What is important for us is to portray those times as a kind of autonomous, or the Judengasse as a kind of an autonomous zone, where actually Jewish traditions were thriving, and Frankfurt became a center of Jewish life in Europe, and known for its wisdom and scholarship and its tradition. So on the left-hand side, you see the Frankfurt Talmud edition, for instance. What we do on the side is we do lectures, we do concerts, we do like special torchlight tours, and we do dinners. That's a Rothschild dinner where we cook recipes from the old time, from recipes from early modern times. And so we try to give a kind of sensual approach and put an emphasis on the question how life might have been. And another important thing for us is that we don't rely on images by Christians of the Judengasse. We don't rely on images that were portrayed later on, and no images or description by Christians. And those are the most famous description of the Judengasse, but you won't find them on site. I'd like to talk now about the whole process. We've been towards the new permanent exhibition at the second site. We say the permanent exhibition has 2 parts. The first part, Masel and Brache, is in Museum Judengasse, and the second part is at the Rothschild Palais. So in 2016, when I came to the museum, we opened up several platforms, pop-up platforms. That was our first one. It was on the River of Main. And we conceived this as a social space, as a Jewish museum on the second view. So it was a place for gathering and talks. And what we did on site was a small pop-up exhibition, and we did workshops. And the aim was to get to know our visitors better. So we had questionnaires, and with those questionnaires and precise questions, what are you expecting from a Jewish museum? What did you hear of art? What is your interest? What do you trust in? How much time would you like to spend at our site? We tried to get to know our audience better. That was our main aim. In the time after, from those findings, and from data we had from the time before, we took a quite bold decision, I would say, saying we are doing our museum for 8 target groups. And so here you find the 8 target groups. Some of the target group we already had in former times. Some of the target groups we would like to have, like for instance, the family with Turkish background. So right now in our educational program, we do quite a lot to actually get them involved in our museum programming. And those personas, they had precise names and precise ideas, and we were walking with them in our minds through our new exhibition. They played a very important role also in the further process. And we worked with a methodology which some of you might know. It's called design thinking. So the first two parts, the emphasize and define parts, were those parts that took place at the first pop-up platform on the boat, and the second part took place at the second pop-up. And so we used the time in between those two platforms to do what is called ideate, which means coming up with precise ideas and statements about what do you want to tell. And so we have kind of 4 key messages. You can read them here. It's Frankfurt's been a thriving center of Jewish culture in Europe, both in early modern and modern times. Jews have shaped the development and modernization of the city. Jewish culture is diverse and constantly evolving, and Jewish history in European diaspora is shaped by conflict and violence. So those are our core messages for the permanent exhibition at both sites, and that's what we developed. And then later on tested at the second platform. That was in summer 2017. Here we were developing these kind of prototypes, but first of all, we were inviting our audience to build this place with us and with a collective, an art collective. So this is how the place looked like. We were asking who are the personalities you would like to get to know better, introducing them on the table and initiating talks about that, for instance. We had participatory displays on both pop-up platforms. And one of them was asking, how should our new museum square, what should be the name of it? And actually the person that got the most votes, Berta Pappenheim, was a suggestion by a visitor. And so we are now at the Jewish Museum at Berta Pappenheim Square. This is the image movie that we did for the opening.
Ein
It's in
neues
German, but I
Haus,
think you'll understand
ohne
the message.
mit neuen Themen und neuen Perspektiven, ausgehend von der Gegenwart, die Geschichte im Blick, die Zukunft vor uns. Was bedeutet Zusammenleben? Was bewegt uns? Welche Zukunft wollen wir gestalten? Wir sind jetzt Jüdisches Museum Frankfurt.
So that was the planned grand opening. The pre-events could still take place with quite some people on our square, the Berta Pappenheim Square, but at the main opening, we are basically alone. That's a view back. That was the opening of the museum in 1988 by Chancellor Helmut Kohl on the 9th of November. You see basically male audience. And you see the first exhibition, which was dedicated, changing exhibition, which was dedicated to the first Jewish museum in Frankfurt, which opened in 1922, the Museum of Jewish Antiquity. And this exhibition was asking what remained. So the approach of the museum basically in the 80s and 90s was a commemorative approach. It was commemorating what was lost and trying to show the richness of the culture that once was. And as you can see now in our campaign, we put the emphasis on the now. We say we are now, and this was the advertising campaign towards the opening. These are some images of the new building. We have the Rothschild Palais was enlarged by a new building by Stark Architects. We call it the light building because of the light, how the light comes in. Here you see the new entrance, which is a public space. Everybody can come in. There is free Wi-Fi. Here you see our cafe, which is a kosher deli. It was important for us to make a multi-kosher deli because sensuality and food culture plays a crucial role in our education. And so we work with that, and the community gave us, is supporting us so that we can do that. We have a library, which is important for our place because it's been the first public library. This is a public library again, and we enlarged our library collection with the new emphasis on children's and youth literature, and we do lectures on science and workshops. And on the right-hand side, you see the bookstore. What is maybe important to say in accordance with the library is that we have the Family of Frank Center. So we have the personal belongings and documents of the family of Anne Frank. And you can study them there. And this is also the last room of our permanent exhibition. So this is a look in the core exhibition, the first room dedicated to the present. These are the art galleries that play a crucial role, the fine art galleries. This is the second, maybe I should say that the permanent exhibition is not chronological, it has a thematic structure. On the third floor, we focus on the present. We start with the present, and then there is a breach, and then we tell anew the history. Susan?
Yeah, Miriam, I'm sorry, but the initial presentations were each only supposed to be 10 minutes.
Am I too long? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, about 20 minutes. So
okay.
If you could just wrap it up, please. So we have time.
I wrap it up. Okay. So this is, I'm sorry. So this is the second floor is dedicated to tradition and ritual, and the first floor to family and daily life. And you see that the Restart Palais was restored and that we take it as the largest object. There is a lot of offerings for children. We care, we call it human-centered design. So there is kind of hands-on feedback possibilities on the side. And I'm going to skip the last movie because I'm sorry that I'm already too long. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you very much. The worst part of being a moderator is that you're also supposed to be a policeman, which I hate, but we have a small amount of time. So I'm going to ask you both for short answers, first of all. Here's a question which I think everybody will have on looking at these quite amazing new exhibits. They're, just state of the art in terms of, certainly in terms of form. Who paid for all of this? Short answer, please. And it doesn't, I don't mean, I've just been roughly, how much government, how much private sponsors?
I can say, I mean, for us, all in all, both new locations, the enlargement building, and all in all, it was 50 million by the government, by the city of Frankfurt, additional 5 million by the county of Hessen, additional 6 million private donations.
In our case, I believe it was around 20 million, all from the government, and 3 million went towards the Children's Museum of that amount.
That actually, from what I saw last week, it looks like it cost more than that. But again, so
great designer.
Yes, absolutely. So here's a question that I've really been wanting to ask, because one thing that I notice very much in Germany, there's a, because Germans' relationship to Jews is based on the Holocaust, and because the word race and even folk is problematic in Germany because it's associated with the Nazis. There's often a tendency that I run into where people are, they want to completely reduce Judaism to a religion. And I just read a quote by the Israeli historian Shlomo Avineri, who said, Jews went into the 19th century defined as religion, but came out of it defining themselves as a nation. Now, there's a tension there, and I wonder how each of you dealt with that in designing the new exhibits. Michal, could you? Because you made a very conscious decision, definitely, to start with the Torah. And, you know,
Yes.
that's, yeah.
There are two things. One is that our visitors are very much interested in Jewish religious life. And for the longest period, this is what dominated Jewish life in Germany. It's only in the 19th century when the change came and the Judaism becoming a religion came from a Protestant perspective. It was sort of imposed on it. We have in Germany the German school groups that come and they cover 3 monotheistic religions. And which at the moment, we're sort of being forced into this niche and Judaism is a religion, which is something that we very consciously tried not to do. It's something, Jewish religious life, without that, you wouldn't have anything else. And it is continuity, and it's the past and it's the future, as well as the many other identities that there are, which is why we decided that it was very important to make it known, and also it was missing in the first core exhibition, and we heard from our visitors that they really missed this aspect and learning more.
Miriam, was this a question for you? And
in our case, we don't define. It's a conscious decision not to define how you define who's Jewish and what is Jewish. There is even an installation on that, raising up this question. So whether you define yourself as, whether you define Judaism as a culture, whether you define it as a religion, whether you define it as a nation, and the consequences of it, it's all there. But we don't decide for our audience what is the right answer.
so here's a question. It's funny, I was thinking of asking this question, but now 2 people in the chat have asked it more or less the same question, particularly since the Black Lives Matter demonstrations last summer, although even before that, many American Jewish museums have taken a turn towards social justice, towards focusing on the ways in which other peoples have experienced racism, and feeling bound, feeling morally obligated to connect the Jewish experience of persecution with other people's experience. And I have run into this many times, that this has become a big concern for many, not all, but many Jewish museums and Holocaust museums. I wonder if you could talk about whatever parallels there are in Germany and in your museums, and how much weight you think should be given to those kinds of considerations. Michal.
I would say that this is not featured in our permanent exhibition, which was conceived the moment before the murder of George Floyd. But we do, and always have done, we've dealt with a lot of issues in our programming. We have the Academy across the road, and we recently did a feature about Roma and Sinti communities. And we very much try to bring into our programming these wider discussions. And I'm sure that that will continue in the future and maybe will expand. But one has to say that Germany in this respect is not in the same place as the USA. Let's be honest about it.
Can you say a little more about why that's the case?
I wish I knew. They're not being confronted with a Black minority, and there isn't the same kind of a Black minority here in Germany. I have friends who've moved here who are from England or the States, and they're Black, and they're treated either as if they are selling drugs or that they're about to attack people. So there isn't really it's not in the culture. I would say, because the minority isn't established as it is in a very different way in the United States.
Well, there is, of course, a Muslim minority, and I know that you've done programming reaching out to that minority on a number of occasions, including most centrally, I guess, the 10th anniversary of the Jewish Museum Berlin.
Well, we do actually do a lot. We work with local schools. We offer tours in Turkish. We reach out specifically to Muslim communities. There's actually, we do a lot. And I think the fact is that the museum is located in a neighborhood that is predominantly Turkish. And the fact that the Children's Museum is going to be free means that I think we're going to have a lot more communication with people in the local area. And I think that's going to be a big shift for us in a positive way.
Miriam, do you want to address that?
Yes, because I have to say, you know, the approach of Germany, there is not one Germany. The Germany I'm experiencing here in Frankfurt is completely different than Berlin. And there is a whole process of, you know, decentralization in Berlin, since Berlin is the new Hauptstadt. That changes a lot. Frankfurt's always been a very diverse town. It's always been a town of trade. This is where the European Central Bank is situated. There is 75 people of 75 different nations living here, and it has another take on that issue. I experience at least. So your question. In how you frame Jewish history and culture. I mean, for us, it plays the diversity plays a crucial role in all our educational programming. And there's programming we do particularly to reach out for a new and diverse audience and get them involved. There is dialogue programming that we do, but we don't tell in the main core exhibition, like Michal said, we don't tell a comparative story or anything, but the kind of question, what are personal stories and experiences, experience of discrimination, all this play really a crucial role, and they matter for our changing exhibition. For instance, right now we have a changing exhibition called The Female Side of God. And there we approach, you know, at the core is the Shekhinah concept, but we approach it from different angles, and there is Islam included too. Also, we do like dialogue tours with like a woman who's teaching Islam, and our curator here. So there it's much more visible for what you're asking than at the core exhibition.
I have to say, it's not just me that's asking it. You probably don't have time to look at the chat, but it's really striking to me how many people are asking about exactly this question, you know, making reference to the extraordinary National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. I mean, this is clearly a major issue in American Jewish museums that naturally, for all of the historical reasons, some of which Michal mentioned and for others, it cannot be the same kind of issue for a Jewish museum in Germany. So let me ask a question that I hope you're in a position to answer. What's your hardest problem? Let me put it differently. Both in constructing the core exhibit, but particularly in thinking about all of the stakeholders you're responsible to and all of the different groups that you want to reach. What's the hardest, Michal?
Bizarrely, I find is that the group that we don't reach are the Berliners. They aren't coming to the exhibitions, and we don't understand why. We've used this period now of being closed to try and find new ways to be more locally interesting. I think now that we have a Nora exhibition, people will come to that, but then they come once, or they come and they bring guests. But why aren't they coming to all our changing exhibitions? Why is it mostly people from the outside? That is quite astonishing to us. And but there's so much competition in Berlin. There are so many museums that I think that is probably the very simple reason behind it. But accessing this group is something that's we're really working on going forward.
Miriam, what's your biggest problem? You know, what I've tried to draw out actually here in the few minutes that are remaining to us, just by reading the comments, in addition to my background knowledge, I'm becoming acutely aware of the differences in context between people who work in American Jewish museums and people who work in German ones. So I'm trying to ask you to, somehow try to communicate something of the difference to an audience that, well, I have to, since it was in the public comments, I'll just mention it. Someone was quite disturbed about your space in the Judengasse because the English association with Gasse is gas. And this person's immediate association was, how is a museum naming itself after Jews being gassed? And of course, several of us pointed out that Gasse just means lane in German. But it is, that's just an example of a small example of a gap between the kinds of problems that the two of you have to deal with and the kinds of problems that people working in American Jewish museums have to deal with. So I'm trying to get you both to make that present for the rest of the people.
Interesting, the main thing is, we are site specific. And Frankfurt Jewish history is 900 years old. It's been there has been 3 programs, but there is a strong kind of ongoing content that's unique. There is a Frankfurt diaspora that we reach out to and that we try to get involved into our museum. And because we are site specific, we didn't change the name. We kept the old name of Judengasse, which is the lane and street.
Yeah,
and of course it's district. The work we do is a concrete work, but we frame it, and that's what I'm saying with Germany. We frame it in a European context. You can't tell the Rothschild family's story, which is a story of entrepreneurship in 19th century, on Jewish philanthropy and Jewish diplomacy in 19th century. You can't tell it as a Frankfurt or a German story. It's not, it's a European story. And so this is what we essentially are. We are telling a European Jewish story. We are situated in Frankfurt, and it's both local and it's both European. And this is how we define ourselves. And I saw that Darius was asking the question why I was putting an emphasis on that the memorial sites are outside of the museum. And this is pretty much because we put the emphasis on life. We put it on the now, and we put it on life. And we tell daily life stories, personal stories. We don't tell the Jewish story. We tell Jewish stories, personal stories, intimate stories, and there is, in whatever we do here, there is of course the loss, and there is the grief, and of course it's only a small rest of what we can tell of what once was. And that shapes everything that we do. So there is commemoration, but it's a kind of the sign outside and inside everything that we do. But we try to put an emphasis on what Jews, particularly in early modern and in modern times, were building up in this city that had a tremendous meaning to European Jewry.
I understand. Okay. Neither of you really wants to talk about problems. So let me try and ask another question. What would count as success in 5 years? having built these, really impressive new core exhibits and surrounding them with various kinds of programs, what would make you happy 5 years down the road? What kinds of receptions would you hope for? Miriam, you want to start?
Well, I would be glad if this was a vivid center where that is perceived both by people that define themselves somehow Jewish for whatever reasons, and but for a diverse audience too, that they would feel engaged, encouraged, empowered by the stories that we tell, and encouraged to reflect on the question, because that's the core question we are raising: how do we want to live together? And so encouraged to discuss those questions and to shape how the society they want to live in. That's our core mission, I would say.
Michal, what would make you happy 5 years down the road?
I think the core exhibition, we're only at the start. We've just opened it, but it's the beginning of a process. We conceived it. We had all these wonderful ideas, but we don't know if they really truly function until the visitors come. And we have a lot of visitors, and I imagine that we'll be changing and adapting a lot of things. And I hope we will, and I hope we'll listen to the visitors. We have, as you saw, I put the table of numbers just to show the variety of the kinds of visitors that we have, mostly being Italian as our #1 group, and then with 25,000 Chinese visitors, and that number seems to be growing. 1 in 4 Chinese visitors Berlin go to the Jewish Museum. Why? And how can we? Oh, this is also to do with the problems. A success would be is that we have found a way to reach these audiences, and they go away with a sense of satisfaction, with they're inspired, they've learned, they have questions, and they want to come back.
Okay, I have a lot of comments here, more than questions actually, and I think I'm not going to read them all, but let me there are a couple of concrete questions. What role does provenance play in the actual display of your displays? To what degree is provenance made transparent?
Yeah, I mean, we make it transparent where we know. We initiated a project, provenance research project on Judaica in this whole process, and we restituted some Judaica to the Jewish community, and where we know what we know, we put it on display. There is one place where we address restitution, and that's a Matisse painting, which belonged to a Jewish collector. And we bought it in accordance with his son, and so we tell the story of how how the Matisse painting was looted and where it went to, and so we address it right away.
Michal?
We've had 2 provenance projects so far. First of all, we looked at our paintings and drawings, and had somebody come in especially to research that. Then we did a Judaica project. The government is now giving us a full-time provenance researcher, so that will be a full-time position, so that we can always rely on the fact that somebody has time to research every single object, which I think is important going forward in the future. In the exhibition, similarly, as Miriam said, where we know, we say when we explain the stories. We have a moment in the exhibition where we display Judensilber, and the Jews were forced to give up their silver that they had in their households, and it was collected and then used for the war effort. But in the case of Hamburg, the local museum curator had a particular penchant for silver and silver spoons, and so he didn't give it up for melting down. So in Hamburg, in this museum, they have a huge collection of this material that was gathered. So they have given us a lot for our permanent displays, and perhaps somebody will come and recognize their family pieces, but of course they're mostly multiples, so it's almost impossible to recognize anything. But it's definitely a theme in the exhibition.
I've got a lot of people asking me for my views here. I'm a moderator in this. Let me see if I can think of something short. Look, let me just express a hope, because it may not be clear to those of you who are not aware of the German context how politically explosive questions surrounding Jews are in this country. They're really explosive. Let me just say that my hope is that both of these museums can serve, and Miriam said she doesn't want to tell one Jewish story, she wants to tell Jewish stories, and I know that's the case with MICHAL. I hope that both of these museums will be centers in which a genuine variety of Jewish stories, Jewish beliefs, can be openly debated and discussed. I hope that in particular, both there's room for a lot of people are, you know, some of the comments about the social justice turn in many American Jewish museums point to the universalist strand in Judaism. Now, that is a strand that I support and belong to, but it's controversial. Not everybody in the Jewish community does. And in particular in Germany, it's quite surprising often to hear that a very large part of the Jewish community is universalist and gets its universalist roots, if you like, from the book of Exodus. Remember the stranger because you were strangers. Remember what it was like to be a stranger in the land of Egypt, and therefore you have an obligation towards a stranger. My hope is that this view, which I would say a very large number of Jewish museums in America share, as exhibited by the invitations that I have received, but also just from the commentary this afternoon. My hope is that that's a position which will be possible to discuss and have represented in both of these Jewish museums, along with a free and open discussion of the elephant in the room in the Middle East. I'm only putting my view in here because several people have asked me to. That's actually, we're just about to end this. Can you, I have a postal delivery coming. Michal, do you want to wrap up? Do you want to say anything final?
Lisa, how are we doing for time?
We're just fine. We have 2 minutes. So if either of you or both of you would like to give a concluding comment, please feel free. And I'm happy to bridge us at the natural point to the next session anytime now.
Miriam?
Well, I think Jewish museums in Germany are much more relevant than they've been 10 years ago. That due to, on the one hand, rising anti-Semitism, on the other hand, you know, Germany in particular place becoming more and more aware of its indigenous population, which is Jewish. And I think there is a shift. We spoke about that, Michal, that puts us much more in the focus now. And yes, we are in a very delicate, this is a very delicate place we are in. There is 0.1% of Germans are Jewish. And so there is a lot of Germans who never met a Jew. And that come to a Jewish museum to somehow meet a Jew or get to know what is Jewish, and that's a weird positioning that we are in. But for me, it matters because Jewish life changed so much in Germany in the 90s, to put an emphasis on that. And to put an emphasis on possibilities of self-empowerment, of evolvement, of solidarity with other communities, because the Jewish community is being heard and others are not. So this is the kind of the position I would say we are in, which I feel is yes, a delicate one, but a very heard one, an important one, politically important one. We are probably one of the most political museums in Germany, and you shouldn't forget. I mean, this is a post-genocidal society. In its made in its still in 75%. So wherever. So there is always the echoes in there. It's always there, and this is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with those echoes.
Echoes is a good place to stop, I think. Although someone wrote, and I think the two of you should be glad. Why are there no Jewish museums with such ambition as these two in the USA? And of course, other people, point out some of the differences. But I think it's clear that even in the short period of time, you've both impressed your colleagues with the scope and ambition of what you're doing. So thank you very much.
I'd just like to give I didn't have a moment to say my final.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The Jewish Museum, the force behind it was very much to do with memorial culture, and that will always be central because we're in Germany, and that cannot ever be forgotten. But I feel, and I think the museum in general feels, that we have to look towards the future as well. At the same time, we look towards Jewish life. And I know that not every Jew is religious, but I think the idea of bringing neshama back into a Jewish museum, the idea of religious life, that it does have a place in this museum, I think is also extremely important as well.
Let me just say personally, if that was in relation to my question, I certainly would never disagree with that. So,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.